let's talk about the story of Jessica Lunsford. She was a young girl who was kidnapped from her home in Florida. She was raped, and then she was put into a hole and buried alive. The one who kidnapped Jessica Lunsford and raped Jessica Lunsford and buried alive this young girl, John Couey, should, according to Pope Francis, not receive the death penalty. Because according to Pope Francis, to put to death people like John Couey would be an attack on his human dignity. His human dignity. Because we have to understand human dignity. Doesn't matter that this guy kidnapped a young girl, raped her, and buried her alive. No, none of that matters. What matters is the human dignity. Human dignity. And we have always heard for years, usually by people who are critical of the death penalty, we have always heard for years that punishment must always be proportionate to the crime. Well, what type of punishment is proportional to kidnapping, raping, and burying a young girl alive? She's literally put underneath the earth. Dirt is put on top of her body, and she suffocates underneath the ground. What type of punishment is proportionate to such a crime? Death, obviously. Capital punishment, obviously. Not being put into a prison where he'll get 3 meals a day and where taxpayers' money will pay for his breakfast and he'll have recreational time and he can go outside and play softball. And yes, people on death row are allowed to play softball. That's not a punishment that is proportionate to the crime. Pope Francis utterly opposes the death penalty. And not only does he utterly oppose the death penalty, but he wants every single Christian on earth to become an abolitionist against capital punishment. Yes, I am not joking. You can read this in Francis's encyclical, Fratelli Tutti. Fratelli Tutti means all brothers. We're all brothers, right? Because fratelli, like fraternity, brotherhood. And then tutti, like the Spanish word todo, totality, total. It means all, right? We're all brothers. And in this encyclical, Francis quotes Pope Saint John Paul II. JP2. This is the Pope that everybody worships. Everybody worships this guy. Like, he's a rock star. He's bigger than a rock star, right? They made him a saint. And I wouldn't be surprised that after Francis dies, they'll make him a saint too, right? He's a saint, you know. Pope Pius XII, the guy who actually resisted Adolf Hitler. He took on the Third Reich. He rescued hundreds of thousands of Jews from the death camps. No, that guy's not a saint because we don't want to offend people. But John Paul II, oh, he's a saint, even though he brought Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, every religion that you can think of, he brought it into the Vatican. He brought it into, what was it called, the church in Assisi or wherever it was. I don't remember. But he played the harlot with all these false religions, okay? That's what he did. But they made him a saint. Okay, you know, it's out of my control, it's out of my power, whatever. But in this encyclical by Francis, supposedly Francis wrote it. I mean, looking at Francis, I don't know if that guy even has the energy to write anything. Because you look at these encyclicals, they got like 20,000 words. I don't know how this guy gets the energy to write. I mean, look at him. It looks like he's about to drop any moment from heat exhaustion. I don't know if any of you guys ever been to Rome, but if you ever go to Rome, one thing that you will notice very quickly is that they don't have AC. Europeans don't believe in AC, okay? If you go to Scandinavia, they don't believe in AC because it's too cold up there. If you go to France, they don't believe in AC because it's too much money. Okay, Italians are no there. Too much money, too much dinero. They cannot pay that kind of money. Very expensive. Mucho dinero. No, I'm speaking Spanish, but it's like Italian. Whatever. Super, super hot in Rome. Rome is a very hot place, very humid. So I don't know how the guy has the energy to write 30,000 word encyclicals, but whatever. They say he wrote it. But in this encyclical, it quotes John Paul II. I won't call that guy a saint. And in this quote from John Paul II, it says, "All Christians and people of goodwill are today called to work not only for the abolition of the death penalty, legal or illegal, in all its forms, but also to work for the improvement of prison conditions out of respect for the human dignity of persons deprived of their freedom." Deprived of their freedom. Like, how the hell do they get into prison? How do they get into the situation where they have been deprived of their freedom as if it's a bad thing? When you kidnap people, you deprive those people of their freedom. So if you kidnap people, you've lost your right to freedom. You've lost your individuality. It's gone. If you murder somebody, if you maliciously, you planned it out, you did premeditated murder. All right, if you have done premeditated murder with malicious intent, and there's many, a limitless number of examples of this. You've lost your right to life. Really, you have forfeited that right to life, and that's why we have things like the death penalty, because you have taken away, you have deprived other people of their freedom to life. So why should you have your right to life as well? You have forfeited that right. And here, John Paul II, and by extension Francis, because he's quoting him in this encyclical, they both believed, both of these popes, they both believed that every single Christian on this planet must become an abolitionist to the death penalty, must oppose the death penalty. So the Catholic Church now wants all of us to become essentially Episcopalians, who are just opposing the death penalty. The Catholic Church wants everybody to become an abolitionist all of a sudden, to oppose the death penalty. And I just don't see how people can oppose the death penalty. I don't know. It's beyond, I can't fathom it, to be honest with you. It's beyond my understanding. I can't fathom why people are opposed to the death penalty. When you hear of stories of people like John Cooey, who took Jessica Lunsford from her home, raped her, put her in a pit, buried her alive. I don't know how you can sit there and say, oh, they have human dignity. What human dignity does this monster have? Tell me. Ted Bundy, Dahmer. There's many examples. I heard a story, the horrific story I remember I read about recently, where a gang of guys, they wanted to murder somebody. Just for the hell of it. They wanted to see what it felt like to murder somebody. This happened, I think, in Arizona. And they went into a bar, and they were going to find some random guy in a bar. They were going to kill him. I mean, just sick people. And they went into the going and they saw a U.S. Marine. And they said, let's kill this Marine. So they waited for the Marine to exit the bar. They put a gun on him. They said, we're going to rob you or whatever. They took him to a car. They drove him off to the desert. And I think they shot him or stabbed him. They did something horrendous to him. And then they just, while he was still alive, they literally just put him in the desert. They just left him there. And they left him. They left him there to die. And they found his body eventually, and the autopsy concluded that he died from I think dehydration, exhaustion, and a number of other things. They brutally murdered this guy. Imagine being stuck in the desert, and it's not like he died immediately. I think it took several days before this guy died. I mean, it's horrific. But according to Pope Francis, it would be contrary to the gospel to put these evildoers through capital punishment. And I'm not joking, actually, when I say this, because Pope Francis literally said that the death penalty is contrary to the gospel. He really did say this. And I'm going to read to you guys the quote here. This is from the Pope himself, okay? This is from Papa Francisco. One has to strongly affirm that condemnation to the death penalty is an inhumane measure. So the death penalty is inhumane according to Francis. So to get people to condemn people like the people who murdered this poor Marine by leaving him out in the desert to die, to put those types of people through capital punishment, that's inhumane. He says it's inhumane. It is an inhumane measure that humiliates personal dignity. You know how he talks? in whatever form it is carried out, and it is of itself contrary to the gospel. So the death penalty is contrary to the gospel. So, and it's amazing that you have people who come out and say, "Oh, Francis is not against the death penalty. He's not against the death penalty." And it's like, the Catholic Church has become not almost. I hate that word. People use it all the time, right? It's almost like this. It's almost, and I think the reason why we use the word almost all the time is like we use it sort of like a pre-qualification because we are afraid that people will respond to us and say, well, actually, no, it's not entirely the situation. You see, there's some little exceptions that you forgot to mention. So let's sit here and hair split, whatever you said for hours and hours until we're blue in the face. The Catholic Church has become Talmudic. It has become the temple. This is what people don't realize. The Catholic Church has become the temple, the Jewish temple. That's what it become. That's what it has become. What do I mean by that? See, because people come up to me and they say, Ted, how could you say these things about the Catholic Church? How could you say these things about the Pope? Because it says, in the New Testament, Jesus says that I will establish my church and the gates of hell shall not prevail. Yeah, yes, absolutely. Jesus Christ did say that. That doesn't mean the church has to be the pontificate of Pope Francis, okay? It just means that they're always going to be the righteous people of God. That's how I see it. Because you can't tell me, you can't look at this Pope and tell me, oh yeah, this is the church, and it's the gates of hell are not prevailing anywhere. The gates of hell are not prevailing in the Vatican when you see a Pope like this, who would defend people like John Cooey, who kidnaps, rapes, and buries alive a young girl. Because that's the people that Francis is defending here. He's saying that if you have these people put through capital punishment, it's inhumane and contrary to the gospel, which means that every single Christian legislator in America or elsewhere who supports capital punishment, they are contrary to the gospel. So Governor Greg Abbott, who's the governor of the state of Texas, he's a Catholic, and he firmly supports the death penalty. The state of Texas executes more people than any state in America. I guess Greg Abbott is not a Catholic, or he's contradicting the Bible. He's going contrary to the Bible. It's sick, okay? It's sick. It's sickening. This is sickening. This is the ravishing of justice. This is not justice. This is the rape of justice. But people will sit there and say, oh, Ted, how can you say these things? How can you say it? Well, look, I'm pretty certain that these very people who tell me these things, who criticize me, I'm pretty sure that if these people were alive thousands of years ago in ancient Judea, and they saw Jesus telling the religious leaders, you corrupt the teachings of my Father with your own traditions. You are wolves, you are serpents, you are whitewashed sepulchres, you are blind guides, your father is Satan. I'm pretty certain you would have told Jesus the same thing. Jesus, how could you say this about these people? The temple was established by God. It was established. The Catholic Church was established by God. It was. The temple was established by God, and yet the temple became so corrupt that God destroyed it. That God destroyed the very architecture that acted as a monument for that religious institution. He destroyed it. In fact, there's a verse in the New Testament where I think one or several of the disciples go to Jesus and they say, oh, Jesus, look at this beautiful architecture. Oh, my gosh. And Jesus says, yeah, it's all going to come down. It's all going to come down. It's amazing that in those days they marveled at at their own architecture, right? It's amazing because we do the same thing today. Human beings haven't changed that much. And you can go to the Vatican, and believe me, you will marvel at the architecture in the Vatican. I was like, when I went to the Vatican, I went to St. Peter's Square, and I was like Juba and Gladiator. Remember that movie Gladiator, where Juba, the African guy who's friends with Maximus, he sees the Colosseum and he says, I did not know men could build such things. Okay, that was me when I went to St. Peter's Basilica. I was like, I didn't know people, I've seen pictures of it on the internet. I didn't know it was this awe-inspiring. It's beautiful architecture. But it's like the temple. And the Catholic Church has gone down the road of the temple. And just as Jesus told the Pharisees and told the religious establishment, you guys are the sons of the devil, you guys are whitewashed sepulchres, you're like tombs, you're serpents, you're wicked, you corrupt my Father's teachings. Just as Christ told that to the temple leaders, we should be telling this to the Catholic Church. It's gone down the road of the temple. And it's not just the death penalty. It's one of the big things. But it's not just the death penalty. But just to give you guys just some comparisons here, not comparisons, but contrast to past ecclesiastical leaders. Pope Pius XII said, in regards to the death penalty, he said, "When it is a question of the execution of a condemned man, the state does not dispose of the individual's right to life." Francis says that it does. Francis says it's an attack on human dignity. But Pius XII says that it's not an attack on the individual's right to life. In this case, it is reserved to the public power to deprive the condemned person of the enjoyment of life in expiation of his crime, when by his crime he has already disposed himself of his right to live. In other words, when you murder somebody, you have forfeited that right to life. Let's look at another quote. This is from the Catechism of Pope Pius X from 1908. "It is lawful to kill when fighting in a just war, when carrying out by order of the supreme authority a sentence of death and punishment of a crime, and finally in cases of necessary and lawful defense of one's own life against an unjust aggressor." So past popes supported the death penalty. All of a sudden JP2 pops up. All of a sudden Francis comes up and doesn't mean anything anymore. And that's amazing how people can just accept that, right? Like the Pope can just come willy-nilly, nonchalantly and say, we had the death penalty, but no more. It doesn't matter. Past popes supported it. Who cares? And here you have a quote from Pope Francis. "One has to strongly affirm that condemnation to the death penalty is an inhumane measure." Inhumane. It's not inhumane. It's inhumane to give these mass murderers, to give these horrific people, these monsters like John Cooey, to give them a room and board and 3 meals a day, and this is where you're gonna live for the rest of your life, and we have to make sure you have rights because we have to honor your human dignity. But it's not just the death penalty, everybody. Look at how the Catholic Church has totally appealed to the nation of Sodom. When you have Pope Francis himself saying that we need to have civil unions for citizens of Sodom, and he said it in Spanish, and you have people. It's amazing. You have people who come and they want to sit there and manipulate your brain. The Pope didn't say that. It's like, okay, here comes the mind games, everybody. Pope didn't say that. He didn't really mean that. Oh, no, he didn't. See, you forgot. There's this one little thing you forgot here. And it's like, okay, well, can this Pope make himself clear? Can he be plain? No, he can't be plain because there has to be a confusion. And who's the author of confusion? The devil. And that's what this Pope is doing. He's confusing people. He comes and he'll I think he wrote to some nuns one time and he said, "Oh yeah, gay marriage is of the Antichrist or something." And then now he's saying, "Oh, civil unions." And when he was an archbishop back in Argentina, he said the same thing. He said, "Oh yeah, civil unions." And then you have some Catholics who come over and they want to manipulate your brain and deceive you, and they'll say things like, "Well, no, it's not the same thing. See, he didn't say marriage. He said civil unions. Civil union is a marriage. It doesn't matter if you get married in a synagogue, in a mosque, in a freaking Mormon temple. It's a marriage. It doesn't matter if you get married in a government office. It's a marriage." And it's not a sacramental marriage. It's different. There's a marriage, but then there's sacramental marriage. Okay, so what you're saying is that the Pope is okay for two men to what? Cohabitate or what? To get married at a government office or in a synagogue or whatever? Either way you look at it, this Pope is evil. Either way you look at it. "Oh, but he said it in, Theodore, you don't understand. You're making a huge mistake. You're misinterpreting the Pope here because he said it in Spanish. You see, he said it in Spanish and it was mistranslated. There's literally over a freaking billion people on this earth who speak Spanish. They all heard him, okay? They all could understand him. Like, he said it in Spanish. It's like, what is Spanish all of a sudden like ancient Greek? We need to go find some scholar from Spain to go tell us what he really said. Oh, he said it in Spanish. So we have to get a scholar on the Spanish language from Argentina or from Madrid, España, to come tell us what the Pope said, because he said it in Spanish. And even though there's over 1 billion people on Earth who speak Spanish, no one can understand the secret dimensions of Spanish, because Pope Francis was utilizing the fifth dimension of the Spanish language. He's playing 800 million gazillion 3D chess or some nonsense like that. My mother speaks Spanish. She's from Mexico. Spanish is her first language. She heard the Pope and she told me, like, yeah, that's what the guy said. One guy tried to argue with me about it. He said, no, he said it in Spanish. Like, this guy doesn't speak Spanish. Oh, he said it in Spanish, so I heard he was mistranslating. And it's like, okay, well, let's see. There's over 1 billion people who speak Spanish on this earth. Let's go talk to one of these billion people and ask them what this guy said, because y'all can understand him. Some Mexican guy who's crossing the border literally could hear the Pope say it, and he would understand it too. It's not ancient Greek. You don't have to go find a scholar from Argentina, Buenos Aires, Argentina, to tell you what the guy said, okay? The gaslighting, the equivocations, the false equivalencies, confusion, manipulation, deception, sophistry, whatever word you want to use for bullshitting people, that's what the Vatican is doing. And that's what all the acolytes of the Vatican are doing, by the way. So those are my thoughts on that. The Vatican is not only turning to Sodom, it's not only turning to the defense of murderers, or of rapists, of pedophiles. It's also turning to paganism when you have the whole Pachamama thing. What do you think that was? What do you think that crap was? Here's the thing. This is a long video already. You know what? I'm going to keep going because my flow of consciousness is on right now. If you go to the Book of Wisdom, okay, Protestants don't have this book, so probably, I don't know if most of you even heard of this book, but if you go to the Catholic or Orthodox Bibles, you forgot the Ethiopian Bible too. I'm not sure actually if it's in the Ethiopian Bible, but if you go to the Catholic Bible or the Orthodox Bible, there's a book called the Book of Wisdom. Okay, it's the Wisdom of King Solomon, and in the Book of Wisdom, I think it's chapter 12 or 13 or 14. I don't remember. In the Book of Wisdom, it gives us the most graphic and vivid description of the Canaanite rituals. And in this book, King Solomon says to God, he says, "Thank you, Lord, for allowing us to conquer the peoples who lived in the Holy Land before us." He's talking about the Canaanites. And King Solomon says, "For they would take men to caves and shed their blood as part of their evening rituals. They would murder their own children for sacrifices. They would drink blood and eat flesh, and they would worship idols. Like they did all these horrific things. It was like the Aztec Empire." And what I find amazing is that even though the Canaanite religion was so vicious and so evil, so many Israelites, so many of the ancient Hebrews turned to Canaanite religion. They actually converted to the Canaanite religion. So many of them did this. In fact, there was a civil war in ancient Israel over this, and Israel split up between the tribe of Judah and the rest of the tribes, and they were fighting over paganism because some king wanted to worship 2 golden calves and bring about pagan sacrifices and human sacrifice and all these things. And you ask yourself, like, how did this happen? How did you go from Joshua to having whole generations of Israelites worshiping the Canaanite gods and doing horrific pagan rituals? How did you do that? How did that happen? How does something like that happen? You see it in the Catholic Church. How do you go? I mean, it's amazing. It blows my freaking mind when I see this, when I even think about this, when I make this observation. How do you go from St. Paul and St. Peter, Paul getting beheaded in Rome by Nero, Peter getting crucified upside down, the disciples of Christ, the first disciples of Christ being brutally murdered, to the Emperor Constantine defeating pagans, defeating the persecutors of the church with valor and glory, especially in the Battle of Milvian Bridge, and then also other battles. And from there you go to the Byzantine Empire. You go to the Crusades, fighting against the Turks who were killing Christians. It's like, how do you go from that, the glory of Christendom, to Papa Francisco? How does that happen? It's the same thing with Israel. You went from Moses and Joshua to human sacrifice. You went from the disciples being killed in the Colosseum, literally taking over the Roman Empire. The Christians took over the Roman Empire, making it a force for Christianity. And then you have the Crusades, and you have all these heroic things that happened in medieval Christian history. And I know there were some messed up things that happened as well, but there were some very heroic things that were done. And you go to, Augustine and Aquinas and Bellarmine and Bernardino of Siena and all these great minds of Christendom. And from that, you go to Pachamama, trying to abolish the death penalty and literally embracing Sodom. It's insane to me. It's insane to me. But it's like, why would the church all of a sudden be interested in defending people like John Cooey, the guy who murdered Jessica Lunsford? And then I think about it. Oh my goodness. I was in the church for years. I met a priest who was a predator. I met a second priest who was a predator. I met a third priest who was a predator. I didn't meet this guy, but I used to see him doing homilies, or I used to see him, he would read the Bible during the Mass. I saw a deacon who I later found out was a confirmed pedophile. I met the priest who was literally covering up for him. And I see all that, and then I read about all of the cover-ups that were happening in the Catholic world of this very nature. And then I wonder, why am I surprised that the Catholic Church wants to defend murderers, pedophiles, and rapists from capital punishment? Why am I even surprised to see the Catholic Church defending people from justice, from adequate justice that is proportionate to the crime? Why would I be surprised if for decades the Catholic Church has been defending and covering up for predator priests? Why would I be surprised if the Catholic Church wants to defend serial killers in death row? Anyway, to hell with Pope Francis.
Льется дождь, я по тебе грущу, я по тебе скучаю. Вернись, я все прощу, как слезы по щекам, так капли по стеклу. Увядшая сирень и твой портрет в углу. Ага, на том портрете ты несешь букет в руках. Сирень еще жива, еще не начат крах. Тогда не так, как сейчас, и в небе тучи нет. Вернись, я умоляю, не рви любви билет. А как гуляли по полям беспечные деньки, бежали босиком, топтали васильки и губы на заре. Что вспомнить так хочу, замерзли в январе. Вернись, я все прощу. Ага, от сердца боль в душе покоя не дает. Рыдают облака и песню дождь поет. Поют о том, как я остался без тебя. Такие вот стихи выдумаешь, любя. Вернись, 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 вернись. Вернись, baby, please, baby, please, baby, please. Вернись, baby, please, baby, please, baby, please. Вернись.
полям беспечные деньки бежали босиком, топтали васильки, и губы на заре, что вспомнить так хочу, замерзла в январе. Вернись, я все прощу. Вернись, 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 обернись, обернись, обернись. Вернись, 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 вернись.